series. I'm pleased to introduce to you Andre Andrews. And so he has been very active in the cybersecurity community in Anchorage. He's the founder of ArcticShield, and so he'll be talking to us today about how we can build Alaska's digital frontier here. But he's also been very active with some other organizations. He's an information systems security officer for the U.S. Air Force, also a cyber operations officer for the Air National Guard, the cybersecurity engineer at Cyber Defense. I think that's the main job, right? Cyber Core Defense. Okay. Yeah, and then he's also the executive director at Alaska Developers Alliance. So with that, take it away, Andre.
Thank you. And thank you to the university for kind of being the mecca for technology. There are a lot of events that are happening in October, and happy to contribute to be part of that infrastructure. Today, we're going to talk about Alaska's digital frontier, mostly from the perspective of a 501c3 nonprofit called ArcticShield. We're going to talk about building up Alaska, the importance of the infrastructure, some of the challenges that Alaska is facing in that development, building some of the future professionals and some of the methods and ways that we intend to do that, and where software development kind of fits in as well. There's a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram between security and software development. But in implementation, there are a lot of people in the cybersecurity space that are interested in doing software development. Some of the software development people that are really focused on getting things to production at the expense of some of the security components. And then we're going to talk about some of the emerging technologies that the industry is moving towards, and meet professionals boots on the ground to help Alaska prepare for it. So a question that I would pose is, what happens if Alaska goes dark? The pipelines that bring us internet end up going down. We don't have power. How does that impact the day-to-day operations within Alaska? We take a look at the energy sector, for instance. A lot of critical infrastructure being connected to the internet and highly reachable from the public interfacing space. What is it going to impact be if people are able to tinker with their edit some of the configurations and some of the industries that we see on the screen? Energy, hospital, airport, communications. What do you think?
Diesel generators and satellite links.
Right? Those are critical, even to some of the infrastructure for the federal government. When you talk about the United States' ability to respond to things, they're constantly, from the Air Force perspective, dealing with the incursions in airspace, and our ability to check those all rely on this fabric of technology, an entire stack from hardware to software. As anybody, I imagine there's probably people with different specialties. Raise your hand if you're part of the tech space as far as dealing with software, hardware.
More mechanical.
Yeah. And even in that, there are some components where, especially the robotics, their development doesn't see, and a lot of emphasis when it comes to hardware, because laying some sort of protection on top of those, you don't have a lot of compute or a lot of resources to have those in. So how do you go about implementing defenses to harden the best you can so that people aren't able to edit your configuration? So that emphasizes why we need to build security in systems that are resilient from the ground up and local to Alaska. And that is difficult because we talk about this digital divide. There are a lot of positions in the IT and software development space that go unfilled. They're constantly connecting critical infrastructure. The economy, for the cost of the economy of the local area, when you look at some of the remote places like Bethel that have a higher cost of living, compare that to the wages, it makes it difficult for some of those to get filled. And so we're working with companies that are trying to support and address that, and trying to raise awareness and interest in the technology field in those areas. The workforce doesn't have a whole lot of like trained cyber professionals that are local to Alaska. A lot of what we see are companies that are outside of Alaska that may be hired locally, which is great. But not, when you look at some of the smaller businesses that can afford some of those contracts, where does that leave them? So with that said, there's a lot of opportunity that's here that we can get after, but it's not something that's going to be able to call in, something we're going to have to build locally. So when we talk about building Alaska's digital frontier, let's talk about some of the items that we have done. Just taking a look into some of the spaces that we don't see a lot of events for. One in particular that we did with the university that you'll see in the picture here. There are three distinct pictures. One is the we did an event here with DuffyDown, which is MIT's open source framework. What they do is all of the components that are in that item on the right with the big blue 3D printed stuff. That's all 3D printable, comes in a little package, and comes with an NVIDIA Jetson Nano. So it's a little chip the size of a credit card. You 3D print these components. They have the servos and everything that you need in this little kit put together, and they wrapped all of their components, the ML system into a Docker container that you can share compute from the system itself and the laptop that you can host it on, or you can run all of the logic locally, has a camera on it, and you work through object detection, object avoidance out of this kit. We did this in concert with the UAA here, and some of this the master students took on as their final projects. And luckily, I guess just out of happenstance, there's a program that brings high schoolers to the University of Alaska from all across Alaska's high schools, even the ones that are in villages, some of the remote ones, to come to the university and do a program like this. And they showed up at the same time that we were doing our event, so they got to see it. They got to hop on the interface, take a look at it. A lot of it is Python based, and that was one of the components that was in the curriculum at the university. So there's a lot of overlap there and interest in looking at the application of AI and ML and use cases. This program in particular, they have a worldwide event that they do where car makers and everybody comes together. Pre-COVID was in Montreal, but you could participate, fly there, and bring a solution. And you can see, compare your solution against industry standards, because this is something that is still continuing trying to develop. In some of the vehicles today, you'll see if you're drifting, they'll try to autocorrect. All kinds of technology that is being developed and pushed into the commercial industry for consumption that we have to understand and develop, and our opportunities for us to pursue. In the middle there, you'll see this is our Game Dev Expo that we did in Bethel. And this is part of our getting that interest in some of the remote areas and finding that talent in those people that are interested in these things, and showing them that there are people that are in Alaska that are doing these things in technology, that have that interest, and developing that skill set where they're programming for the purpose of game development, but at the same time, that skill set allows them to open doors into other industries and avenues that they might not have otherwise had. So the center image, you'll see we have our developers and some of the people in Bethel participating. We did in concert with their library's reading program and the Cusco. And then we'd have a follow-on 5-day event where we had students just kind of learn the basics of game development with a free JavaScript library. We didn't need super powerful computers. We had the infrastructure donated to us as far as the laptops are concerned, or the students have their own computers, because not all of them had computers to bring, so we were able to provide those. And the last image that you see on the right here, this was an interesting event where we just kind of played around with drones and UAVs. These were remote controlled systems, super cheap, and just taking a look at some of the metrics. How much does it weigh? How much could it carry? And some of the things, what does it look like when somebody's flying one of these around? What frequency is being blasted out? And this is another component that you'll see of interest in the news. There are now the implementation of UASs, unmanned systems, remote control systems flying around in support of the wartime effort on both sides of the fight. So definitely emergent technology for understanding the vulnerabilities that are associated with it, how it's being detected, and even here in Alaska, how we are able to detect and defend against the use against these technologies against us. So essentially, there are the three pillars that we kind of did on in this organization. There's the education and training component. There is the community defense and application, and some of the career pathways. So the idea being, we don't want to, in our organization, build this rigid pathway that says at the end of this, you're have the skills to be a software developer, because a lot of that is already handled by the university that provides you this foundation for software development and lay the platform for you to jump into these various industries of security. So when you develop these skills that are very broad and applicable to all these industries, having the ability to gain experience in their implementation is key and voluntary. One of the things that you can put on a resume that counts as experience. So partnering with entities outside of the university that are getting after various problems in various industries will augment that education piece and experience piece and provide a platform where if what you're looking for does not exist as a program, you can work with us, we can collaborate, figure out what that looks like, and what we can provide to help build that infrastructure out and develop that community locally. So another part of that are career pathways. So finding ways to take these people that develop these skills and get them into the career fields and places doing the job that they are interested in and that are needed. So a lot of times there are people that are been asking, how do I get into the cybersecurity space? What is it that I need to learn? What certification do I need? What credentials? And all it really comes down to is what it is that you want to do. I typically have been recommending a find the job application that has the list of skills and abilities that they're interested in, and taking that job application and building your experience based on volunteer time around getting after those and having understanding of the hands-on implementation of those items. The career pathways component is an interesting piece for Alaska. There have been a lot of entities that have put out job applications, and I'm sure that if you have been on the receiving end of AI, your application is against a bunch of bots that are also applying to the same position. And so having a method that is built with these industries, especially one in Alaska, that we are trying to fill this role, but we have to constantly slog through all these applicants that aren't really real applicants. How do we filter that? One of the things we propose is we host an event, we build a CTF, we build an experience that people that naturally want to be in that space will come to and participate and allow the company to interview, talk with, and see the experience level of these applicants that are real people that are already here. So for experiences and jobs that aren't remote, that require and that actual be here in Alaska, we check a lot of those boxes off already. And if nothing else, there's a lot of good experience, networking, and collaboration that happens in those kinds of events. So the events that we hold vary. We do hackathons where we ask small businesses and within the community to pitch their problem set. A lot of them pitch that they want to build an application for something. But when we go through the process of developing a solution, ask the right questions, a lot of times you'll find out might be a change in process as opposed to an additional application that is needed. And so that has a lot of interest where you can work with some of the senior engineers that have been doing this for a while, to become part of the team and get after a problem that's going to improve Alaska infrastructure or solve a problem for Alaska business. And sometimes those turn into longer term relationships between our participants and those companies that are pitching solutions. On the cybersecurity side, one of the components that we did last year was the recon of Alaska for 2024, was basically looking at how infrastructure from the state of Alaska looks from the perspective of an adversary or someone that just has access to the open source library that collects on vulnerabilities on applications that are public facing. And looking through those and partnering with CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and saying, these IPs and addresses that have DNS records look like they should not be public facing. We aggregate that list, pass that off to CISA, and let CISA work with those entities because they already have relationships built to ask those questions so they can look at that. That was an interesting event in which we brought up Jeff Foley, who was the developer for AMAS. That is a program in Kali Linux that does open source intelligence and reconnaissance. Plugs into a lot of different databases, but brought up the beta version of his application, and we got to test that out and run it, play with it, and look at it. And everybody that participated in that learned a lot. And we hope that is something that we can do recurrently, because when we find trends through those recons and applications or security vulnerabilities, the idea is to do an education campaign to try to mitigate that risk, make people aware, make administrators that own this infrastructure aware. And then on the next iteration, when we scan again, we measure to see if there was a measurable impact. Did that education campaign go out and reduce the amount of those particular vulnerabilities, or the more or different ones? So that has been one of the, I think, very beneficial events that we hold that kind of does this collaboration where we try to improve the security and resiliency of Alaska's infrastructure. So the pipeline for the workforce, especially when it comes to cyber, there are a lot of different certifications that are out there, a lot of different people in different spaces, because in the cybersecurity realm, there are a whole lot of nooks and crannies to get into and specialize in. No one person can possibly cover that all. So looking at what we had locally available to us, we ran a B-side. This was recently, in September 20th, ran a B-side event. And that is interesting because it's by design, grassroots, local. It is people that are here, that are in space, that are sharing what they're working on, sharing what their interests are, sharing what knowledge they have, sharing their experiences from the cybersecurity perspective in their workplace, sharing some of their experiences from the tools they use in software development. And it's really just kind of designed for cross-pollination of those different teams and skill sets. And it's a good perspective to see what people are working on here. I had a presentation from the Alaska State Defense Force that also has a cyber element. We were focused, I think, on this particular one. A lot of the talks centered around reverse engineering. It's centered around some of the hardware, of course, AI, the big elephant in the room. So they had some people that are here in Alaska. They work remotely, but have a lot of deep experience in the industry. especially when it comes to GPUs. The silicon that's used for chips and some of the perspectives that they think that are going to drive the future of these technologies. So rather than focusing on a lesser component, although that definitely has a whole lot of value, we always try to integrate a hands-on experience of some sort. So like for the B side, there was an executable that somebody had acquired that was hacked. So it had a lot of pretty good obfuscation from people trying to figure out what this binary or application does. So we had a good walkthrough of some of the tools that we use for engineering, some of the techniques to try to unwind when you have an executable and try to figure out what it's doing, how we do that. A lot of the things we have planned in the future include room development. So if you've ever heard of or participated in TryHackMe, there are these operating systems with applications on them that you get to interact with. So we like to help build some of those specifically we can for with a stack of a company that has that kind of technology and just work on and iterate over it and see what we can identify as vulnerability. But I think that definitely having a hands-on component is helpful, and it's not the component that a lot of the companies have the ability to train people to do. So if they're able to articulate what their needs are, we can leverage our volunteer force to build that stack, help people get that experience, and then point those participants to the direction of the company that needs to fill that. So developers being the new defender, it's not really new. It's just something I think has been kind of emphasized. If you are dealing with anything in engineering, you're likely leveraging an entire stack of hardware, software, and code that you are relying on in order to make your job efficient and quick. And there are publications and standards that have been put out recently that we've had talks on, especially when it comes to memory safety, languages that are used. Special publication 800-18 has a nice little roadmap. At least from the federal side and critical infrastructure saying, we need to implement and use languages that are memory safe. Of course, trying to get Alaska ready for the technologies that are here and coming, AI. It's something that the recruiters are dealing with when they put a job posting out. You're dealing with when you're applying for a job posting. People are using in order to make their workforce more efficient. And we need to understand that technology. We need to understand implementation. We need to understand the benefits. And we need to understand the ethics of implementation and use. So then quantum definitely is kind of new. It's still emerging. We don't see a lot of companies implementing it, but they're definitely moving from theory to trying to standardize a quantum defensible solution. So the idea being like quantum computers in the future, they believe will have the ability to make our encryption methods obsolete. So all of the traffic and information that's out there that is encrypted, if someone collects it all and ends up developing the ability to break that encryption, then they'll be able to have access to things that weren't intended. So that is another thing that NIST, an institute that creates these standards, has been working to identify approved encryption, approved quantum resistant encryption methodologies. And so that is a very interesting arena that we hope to keep abreast on to try to make sure that the participants in the technology realm are aware of them when these things come out and they change. The estimate is about maybe 5% of companies have implemented something that uses this quantum resistant cryptography. But it has to be ubiquitous. Otherwise, the stack that you're using for key exchange has to be legacy. And because there will always be legacy systems that are out there, they'll end up having to fall back to legacy methods anyway. And so that is still something that they're working on and trying to figure out is how do we implement this in mass in such a way that there aren't components and segments that require this legacy fallback that is vulnerable. So very thing. Also on the developer side, C# was Microsoft's API, if you will, language that they developed that allowed you access to their quantum infrastructure. So if you needed randomness, let's say for a game devs, they could make a call, maybe I call through this infrastructure to go to this quantum system and get randomness as opposed to the pseudo random generation that you get when you call B to C and start a random function. So be part of Alaska growing cyber defense community. We do hackathons. We take ideas, bring them to life, try to build infrastructure that's resilient and sustainable around them, and put the control into the hands of the people that are here and interested in trying to develop the understanding or experience in sectors that you might not have access to on a regular basis. So when we talk about defense and development and some of the leadership opportunities, the idea is that we want to make sure that the next generation that comes in is prepared for the challenges ahead. And so we have different sectors with different focus. At our B-Sides event, we kind of inherited DEFCON 907, which is a cybersecurity community that is going to host a lot of the Alaska recons and capture the flags. And in software development, we have the Alaska Developers Alliance. That's part of the software development community. We do a lot of outreach through game dev and at expos where people can showcase their project and people can play test them and provide feedback to those software developers and game studios that are here. And some fun events like we know that Windows 10 is reaching end of life. And so having a nice little ceremony where people can talk about the experiences they had, some of the pain points that they've experienced, and maybe some of the fun that they've had on a patch Tuesday. So we have our website, ArcticShield.org. Do you have any questions?
What's like the biggest roadblock of AI development in Alaska?
Well, when we did our event, there were a handful of students that were really interested in getting deep into the research and cutting edge, but didn't have access to the infrastructure to do it, because a lot of those companies aren't here in Alaska, and it's a bit of an uphill battle to get into those. And so they're looking at building a community where people can participate and learn more about AI. And actually, there was a security event, ArcticCon, that was this last week. And there was someone that joined our AK community that said, hey, we're holding a monthly AI, and basically like a, what do they call it, like a fireside chat, right? Where people talk about how they used it, what worked, what didn't, how do you set up a prompt to get the things that you want? Because a lot of the things that we see on the software development side is somebody that says, hey, I built this thing using AI, now it doesn't work. So I don't know where, I don't know why. Let's figure it out. So we turned those, we have one coming up where we're trying to turn that into a hackathon where people that know the web technology work on it and try to repair it, fix it, and see what broke and why and harden it. But that is probably it. I think that AI kind of hit hard, hit fast, and a lot of companies weren't ready. A lot of information gets put in there that probably shouldn't be put in there. A lot of things that are coming out there and being used that aren't ready or would be written. And now somebody has to go back, try to understand and fix and repair. But in the short, for a smaller application, if you need to port something from one language to another, it's free. But I would say one of the missing components were writ large, not just in the software dev or the security community, it's the recurring education piece, a community where people talk about where AI actually is. What you see on the consumer side is different from what developers have access. So when you look at and compare those results, very interesting. And a lot of the events that we find out that are happening like those, we have on the website. If you're interested to get plugged into and talk to people in the industry that have deep knowledge and understanding of what it is, but it can also speak to the user and consumer side on how to use it efficiently and safely.
What groups of people are you normally like focusing on? Like, is it more like college students or people already like plugged into software development and you're trying to grow their skills? Or like, where do you guys kind of like that?
So that's a good question. So there are two sides. Well, I guess technically three. We have the companies that need this resource. We have people that have those skills, and then we have people that are interested in getting into that space. And so we are the link that is a gap between them. The cybersecurity space, especially in Alaska, there are a lot of people with a whole lot of experience in industry that are happy to volunteer their time and energy to answer any questions that you have about a particular subject. The companies that are trying to hire against these skills, we help them weed through that application process by hosting these highly targeted events that they can attend and talk to the participants to help connect those dots. They also show us kind of like a proof, right? Participating in these events or helping build these events are items that you put on a resume that help you stand out, even if out of that event you don't end up being connected to a company. So a lot of what we do it's on that sliding scale, but covers those. I think where we're mostly targeted now is succession and making sure that we have people that are interested, are aware that there are opportunities for them to connect to the people in industry that are sharing their knowledge. So does that answer your question?
I had a question about, you were talking about the quantum encryption becoming a potential issue.
Yes.
The way I imagine that is if software started implementing quantum encryption, but you're still using like an old system, that would make it kind of hard for the new system to run. And that's what you were saying, it's lazy, it's kind of falling back on the old system. So how is the quantum encryption really helping at that point?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, much like IPv6, right, solves a lot of the problems and restraints that we run up against with IPv4. But we kind of implemented things to extend IPv4 to make sure. But if you switch all your infrastructure to IPv6, without being able to fall back to IPv4, there are going to be services that you're not able to connect to, right? Because somebody's not on the infrastructure, the two won't talk to each other. So you have to have this middleman that does this translation in between. So when it comes to like secure key exchange, we say, hey, old key exchange methods are exploitable or they have unpatched vulnerabilities. And if you use them, you risk having your encrypting keys exposed. Then what good does it say? We have a solution that you can use that's going to protect the information you're encrypting. But if somebody makes a call to it or sends a packet to it that says, hey, we need to go back to the old stuff because I can't do the new ones and I need to talk to you, then you're not really, that layer of protection doesn't do you a whole lot of good. And so I think that there are companies that are trying to implement it for testing or implement it either from end to end. They're implementing that solution and trying to reduce the fallback. But in order to set it across industry for it to be the new standard, it's got to be something that at least the highly critical ones implement as a requirement at whatever cost to get companies on board to pay the additional funds, to have the hardware and all of the infrastructure in place. Because if you don't, as soon as it says, oh, I have to go back to the old stuff, then all of the investment, money and time and training that you put in the implementation kind of becomes null and void.
That makes sense. I had another question about intellectual property playing a role in, I don't know, programming or computing and how that, do you guys have a, is there a process to get stuff that you guys work on protected, I guess?
So the short answer, no. I think with the stuff that we work on as a public entity, we're not going to develop anything that is going to be in that. But there are people that have come together on a project, develop something that they think they can take to market, and we point them to those investors and incubators for them to become companies, and they can try their hand in the commercial sector. And if they need a pool of talent, we can facilitate developing that skill set to go support that effort.
Gotcha.
Question? You know?
Yeah, so endpoint detection and response, if I'm understanding it right, it's kind of moved from software to kind of more network-based hardware stuff when we're talking about trying to deal with advanced persistent threats. Can you kind of tell me if that's a correct assumption or if we still kind of use the endpoint detection response in other ways as well?
So if I'm understanding your question right, we have what they call on-prem, which is stuff that you in your building, right, in your four walls, and then you have stuff that is in the cloud, like cloud-based. So you have alerts, detection and response happening that sends a message outside of your building to into the cloud.
Yeah.
So,
and it's mainly cloud-based that I'm thinking of because early on, it was kind of decided that what we could do on-prem, like antivirus, things like that, weren't an adequate response to advanced persistent threats.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of vendors have moved to cloud infrastructure and it has become extremely popular for a couple of different reasons. One being, if my infrastructure is in the cloud, I can service a whole lot of systems, but really have to harden and secure the stuff that's in the cloud. And I can take an operating system that is standardized, I can push that to the customers that are in that physical building, and I don't have to patch all or back up all of those systems. It actually lives in one centralized area. And so there is an economy of force that happens there, where I don't need as many administrators, but I can maintain the same level of security. But with that comes the caveat of a whole nother skill set, right? Of understanding some of the stuff that you have to do in the cloud. For the most part, what you'll see in commercial industry, a lot of the on-prem stuff has kind of gone away. No longer is it you have a firewall, defend the stuff behind that firewall, that the perimeter for an organization, but the advent of the cloud changed significantly. Really, with COVID and remote work, you had people that needed access to those resources that weren't behind your firewall, and the services that needed to reach weren't there either. They're actually in the cloud. And so I don't think that the on-premise component will ever go away completely, because there are a lot of critical systems that aren't talking to that infrastructure. They're not connected to the cloud, and they aren't authorized to do that. So there's always be a component of local but the amount of, or the total quantity in the need for it, I think is gonna continue to shrink significantly. Probably primarily because of the cost savings of leveraging cloud.
And you're thinking about VDI largely when you're talking about that?
DDI, but the implementation of it as well, so. Industries have compliance requirements, and some of them require for that stuff to be secured, and in the space where you talk about being secure and compliant, where does the perimeter get defined? Like if you were scoping something and said all of your data needs to be within your corporate infrastructure, do we consider cloud part of that corporate infrastructure, or is it an external system? And so there is some debate, especially in the compliance side of the house, about where do we draw that line? Where do we actually scope it? Because it's a connection that comes in from the cloud, but it's from the perspective of the system, it thinks it's directly connected. Automatically puts it in scope as a corporate system or an absolute external system. So it's still,
Good question.
yeah, still kind of murky there, and you know, depending on which camp you are, you will know which one is the truth. But even in the assessment side of the house between assessors, some will say, "Oh no, that's the thing." The other person will say, "They count." And here's what you have to do. So the onus really becomes on the vendor for articulating the requirements when it comes to compliance and security. Because someone provides layers, right? When you talk about cloud, you have different implementations. You do infrastructure as code, where they just provide you infrastructure. You have platform, you have services, and so each one of those have requirements for the user on the cybersecurity side and on the vendor side. They say, hey, here's the things that we're going to do. These are the things you have to do. And that was highlighted when we did our recon in 24. There are a lot of companies that have infrastructure that they don't know about. Because somebody says, I need to do a thing. So they spend up to $500 and say, this works better. And gets that end product, but at the same time, they don't understand what they left out there. There's some things that need to happen with DNS records that put their corporate infrastructure at risk. And it's difficult for companies to assess their risk and quantify it when they don't know.
So related to that, you know, the university still runs a firewall, and we've got to use a VPN if you're on campus to access certain resources. And so are you saying that kind of model is becoming outdated, or that for a large, somewhat large institution like the university, it still makes sense?
So the idea that all of your agents talk to a server that is here on campus, when it comes to the security component, will go the way of the dodo. Yeah, the way to the for sure. Because it is more secure, especially from a remote workforce. If your client reports to something that's in the cloud, the network goes down here, who does your agent report to? Right? How does, if you're not within these four walls, you're somewhere else, and your security system is on-prem, how does that reporting happen? How do we know that when you're out there on, you know, going through a Wi-Fi network, whether or not you have been compromised or hacked? If that is in the cloud, whether you're on-prem or you move off base, all that reporting still happens in one centralized area. And if the network were to go down here on campus, I could leave the campus and connect to that cloud infrastructure and say, hey, what is going on with the rest of my nodes that might not be behind the component themselves? And so rather than have separate infrastructure for those that have to VPN into a network, if that network goes down, you're not VPNing anything and your resources aren't accessible. But if it's in a cloud that has requirements for identity, they have, you know, they pour the investment into the engineers to make sure that it is up and their half of the cybersecurity sector is secure, then you pay the dollars for access to the resource. But in the long term, I guess you would save money on having to develop the talent in order to sustain that same infrastructure locally. So when you look at economy of scale, the services that you provide are going to grow and shrink at intervals that maybe aren't predictable. And it's hard to grow and shrink physical hardware that you have here on premise. Whereas in the cloud, you can grow and shrink at your keystroke. So when services are low, you can say, let's shrink our size down because we don't need that extra stuff and have some cost savings. You don't have to do hardware replacement because that's done in the cloud. If a hard drive gets ready to die, they have backups and redundancy, all the other stuff. You can load balance. So your infrastructure is spread across the nation as opposed to centralized in one location. So if there's a resilience for disaster recovery and response. There are a lot of other components that play into the idea, and it really comes down to like the holistic risk appetite and the needs and costs. Because there is still debate about cost savings in the cloud, because you can pay for the infrastructure, have it once, and say, okay, from that scope, there's a lot of cost savings there. But if you're saying, hey, this thing has to last for a long period of time, and somebody's got to pay, somebody's got to patch it, we have to replace hardware because the hardware stack also ages just like the software, and has to be replaced and updated.
I'm just gonna have to get used to services moving to the cloud and put up with latency issues.
And so that is one of the components that is unique to Alaska as well, right? Okay, what good are cloud services if you can't connect to that service or cloud? So there are definitely talks, and there are organizations that are talking about how do we build our own infrastructure here that allows us to be at least somewhat local and deal with some of the latency issues when it comes to connectivity. There was another project that attempted to do a kind of distributed solution where it's like, hey, let me install this application and let me use the cycles of your CPU when you're not using them, and then we can kind of spread information across an entire distributed system within the state of Alaska to try to build cloud. But you know, that fabric only works at scale and it is consistent, and there's a lot of overhead and redundancy. But yeah, I think the direction that we're going for the most part, there's been a heavy involvement in the cloud, but the skill set for on-prem is still necessary. And I think it's just shrinking when you're saying, hey, I want to jump into the job market. Highly valuable for critical infrastructure, but also a lot of critical infrastructure has been focused on not being authorized by infrastructure.
So speaking of the job side things, I got a couple questions there. You mentioned certifications. Are there any, every once in a while I get students asking, you know, hey, it's a good certification, should I get this? Or do you have any blanket general recommended certifications, or is it just kind of like that, depends on what your interest is?
Yeah, I'd say it depends on what your interest is, because I think if you're in the software development side of the house, you know, having a security certification really would depend on the job you're applying for. The king is, this is the job that I want to do. What does that industry standard say that I need? That's how you build your pathway. Because if you just randomly go out and get 1Z, 2Z security certification, those cost money and they expire. And so if possible, you're going to spend that money and that time on something that you'll never actually use and probably forget about and have to test for again when you jump in the market anyway. So, you know, having certifications is great, but you have to realize you're going through a layer that is HR. And HR doesn't know what all of those acronyms are, and they don't care. They just know what the job application requires and what's on that piece of paper that you submitted. So, depending on what you're interested in, if you just want to get a certification just to, you know, cut your teeth on something or validate your understanding, go for it. But I don't think that there is a blanket, hey, this is a certification if you're in the technology realm. If you're in cybersecurity, I think that has is well defined. I think the Department of Defense has set these standards, and most other security entities kind of fall in line with that. Now, even the federal entities are shifting away from those requirements, but they haven't completed yet. It's still there. And when you look at the job market, you'll see the trend. When you look at what you're interested in, you'll see, hey, this thing I want to do, this certification keeps popping up. I would say time it so that when you're ready to apply for jobs, that is fresh, because it lasts for 2 to 3 years, and then you got to get it again. So If you do it now, and then 4 years go by, then you apply for a job and say, I used to have it, they're like, that's cool, but it's not current, it's expired. You gotta do it again anyway.
Other job related question is internships. Do you yeah, have sources or suggestions?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there was an entity at a Teen Tech High School, a teacher there, Brad. And he has asked for, reaching our community and got people that were software developers in the cybersecurity space. Talk to the students about what that's like, what they do. We took on interns, last summer. In the cybersecurity and software dev space and helped them get their, Git profile, set up. And some applications that they could cut their teeth on that took a look at some of the vulnerabilities they had with the messaging application system. Where if you took an executable and called it, gave it the file extension of being a PowerShell or something, it would run it. Like, no scanning, no blocking, we just do it. And so, we had them develop a program that exploited that and took a look at some of the list of file extensions that were executable that they accepted. So that's a nice little thing to have in their resume of juniors in high school. Say, hey, I built this thing, this is what it does. And the key component of those projects is being able to talk through your decision making. To say, why did I select this language in order to do that? What are some of the issues that I ran into with getting something to work? And even if you run into a feature that you can't build, it's still worth during an interview where they take a look at your infrastructure and say, hey, this is what I tried to do and I couldn't get it to work, but these are the things I tried. A lot of the technical side of the house is interested in your thought process. So yes, we have opportunities for doing internships and we plug into entities because a lot of, especially on the last developer side of the house, some of those are business owners. And they say, hey, I'm looking for, X, Y, Z. And we can say, hey, we have internship opportunities you guys are looking for interns to put on. We can mediate and plug those in.
So if students are interested, they should reach out to you at ArcticShield and you might be able to make connections.
Yep, visit the website, let us know, a few of the people that have reached out that were looking to get into the cybersecurity. We just basically do an all call to our infrastructure and the people that say, hey, this is what we got, this is their skill set. Anybody have any openings? Otherwise, they attend some of the events that we hold, and, showcase what we got and either get picked up there or just, buff their resume with some experience or help us build some of the, opportunities and, that applies in their resume. Any other questions?
Okay. So
Online folks.
I'll check here in a little bit. The next one that I had was about, since it came up earlier, kind of the satellite systems, in low orbit satellite systems especially, but kind of in general, right? The general question about the state of security and what they're using. 'Cause I don't think they use quantum encryption or anything on things like Starlink or Amazon's solution for network access over satellite.
Well, I'm not sure what they're implementing, but on all, proliferated low Earth orbit infrastructures, there are actually a lot of them. So there was a company that started sending stuff up there and they got acquired by Apple, which is why now on the iPhone 17, if you're someplace where you don't have access to power, it'll switch over temporarily to Pleo and allow you to send location or short messages. Amazon has jumped in the game with Uber, and theirs is laser based, and so there's a security component that is emphasized there, specifically for DoD, and the amount of bandwidth that they seem to be able to push.
So that's a DoD preference.
Mostly because of the cost of the infrastructure in order to send hundreds of gigs via laser, point to point, that average. And then the cost of trying to get to the target, right? To be able to provide coverage there. That arc, or if you look at the orbits for the satellite, in order to get up north, you end up having to go really far for your coverage cycle. And there's not a whole lot of infrastructure that is there. So I think there's definitely some lag that happens, but when it comes to the encryption component, you have the commercial side, and then you have the federal side usually, and those are very different and come at very different price points. And so, and with those different price points comes that investment in additional security and hardening and resilience. But yeah, I imagine for adoption, the 5% are probably some of the newer companies that are part of that emerging technology that are trying to make it resilient. The first few iterations, probably not, but they'll be the first to migrate if they have the ability to. Otherwise, a company that did implement those, I think, has a leg up because they can say, hey, I have a bunch of buzzwords that I put in there, put in 5% more AI and you get a contract, right?
Well, I guess in a similar vein, right, the discussion that we were having earlier about IPv4 versus IPv6. Do you know if those services are over IPv6 or if they do use IPv4?
Yeah, I think that's along the same vein because even on the federal side, they're pushing hard to migrate their infrastructure to the new stuff because of the encryption stuff that's in there, some of the benefits that, are implemented in software. So definitely a entity that talks to someone that is responsible for making the purchase. If they can cram more of these buzzwords that are in there to say, hey, here's the reason why you should go with this solution. Yeah. I think puts them in a market, and a market that I think is different from the small mom and pop shops that are trying to, participate. Which is why I think you see this separation between the federal side of the house and their acquisition for the same product, and then the things that are available commercially at a price point that the average person would be able to afford.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, let me go check really quick, see what our online folks might have had to say. I'll be right back.
I got one while I was checking. So, it's actually a very offline question, but Principally in Sound is looking at making a occupational enforcement certificate around cybersecurity. So it'd be like 12, 15 credit. And I think they're thinking like it'd be a programming class, a little bit about network security, administration. And I guess my question is, would that be a valuable thing for someone to get started, or with it?
I think so because a lot of the time the idea is people want to jump straight into security, but there's a foundation that is a requirement, and that is experience and understanding of how it's supposed to work, so that you can then secure it. Otherwise, when things don't work, everybody thinks, "Oh, I must be being hacked," and everybody's looking through logs, and in reality, it's the misconfiguration. So securely provisioning things is a big foundation point in understanding how and what the requirements are for a network, and policy that is published that defines this is what secure configuration means and requires. And there is a configuration switch that you should turn on, but we're not turning it on because it breaks this, right? That way somebody who doesn't come in and say, how do I secure this, stand something up, and then key services go down, people are cramming and figure out why. No. This switch we don't turn because it breaks. So yeah, I think there's a foundational level that is required, and I think the roadblock for a lot of people trying to get into the industry. There's a lot of the entry level positions say, I'm experienced. That's not entry level. But from the security perspective, they might consider it because you're entering the more, I guess, focus on security and compliance based off of your experience from understanding how these things are supposed to work and when they're administrated properly. So, I think there's a lot of value in the fundamentals that is the structure of which you're built on. And I know that the guard has also been key in helping get the in response to the proliferated lower orbit LEO stuff, a lot of the villages are being connected now using that, low Earth orbit infrastructure. And well, then, of course, the last summer, there was the of a guarded put installations in shipwreck. And so all of these kind of remote places are starting to be able to get connected, put stuff up on the roof, and making sure that they have access to a much faster connection. No questions online?
No questions online yet. I was gonna ask about, undersea fiber optic cable physical security and what you might know about how we're going about making sure that those connections stay secure.
Boat anchors are the new backbone for dealing with outages. That is a vulnerability that has been exploited. So I know that it's something that on the federal side, they are looking at how that is protected, and the idea that all these companies that are using low Earth orbit power think, hey, if that happens, we may have a fallback that will allow more resilience in that we're not relying solely on this direct under comfort. So that's definitely something I think a lot of entities, commercial and otherwise, are looking at, hey, how do we leverage this in such a way that we mitigate costs? We're not always on it, but in the event that we need it in a critical time, we know that it's there.
Just gonna throw it out really quick. The password for today's survey is linked, I believe, LINKED, all lowercase.
Isn't it linking?
LinkedIn, thank you. Yes, sorry, active, yes. LINKING, thank you. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you very much.